The wind came off the peaks like it had unfinished business. It slammed snow sideways against the cabin until the logs shuddered. Inside, she stood at the window, one hand on the cold glass, the other already resting on the pistol. The dogs rose together. No bark. Just that low certain sound that meant they had already chosen sides. Out in the white, something moved that did not belong to the storm. A shape stepped from the tree line, tall, patient. It did not fight the wind or stumble through the drifts. It simply stood there, letting the blizzard do its work, until the snow thinned just enough for her to see the stance she had not seen in 7 years. She wiped the frost clear with her thumb. The shape did not come closer. It did not need to. She reached for the rifle above the door. The bar across entrance was oak and iron. It had held against bears in winter and everything else this mountain had thrown at her. But the past had learned patience. And tonight, it had finally found her. The axe came down clean. Hard. The wood split straight down the middle, two halves falling away from each other like they had somewhere better to be. Ruth Calloway picked up another log, set it on the stump, brought the axe down again. Ash watched from the porch. Cole watched from the snow. Neither of them moved. Neither of them needed to. This was the morning. This was every morning. The axe. The wood. The cold air that bit your lungs if you breathed too deep too fast. Ruth had learned to breathe slow up here. She had learned a lot of things up here. 7 years of learning. The sun was barely over the ridge. That pale, thin winter sun that gave light but no warmth. It sat above the eastern peaks, like it was apologizing for showing up at all. Below her, through the trees, the valley disappeared into white. No roads. No smoke from other chimneys. No sound except wind and wood, and the soft crunch of Cole shifting his weight in the snow good. That was exactly how Ruth wanted it. She stacked the split wood against the cabin wall, counted the rows. 3 more days of fuel, maybe 4, if the temperature held. It wouldn't hold. She could feel it in the way the air tasted, sharp and metallic and wrong. Like something big was coming, and the mountain already knew about it. She set down the axe, stretched her back, rolled her neck, stood up straight. Most door frames in Colorado territory came up to her chin. This one she had rebuilt herself when she moved in, raising it 4 inches. She still had to tilt her head slightly. Old habit. 7 years of living here and she still tilted her head walking through her own front door. Some things you carry so long you forget they're even there. Inside of the Galhan was small and exactly right. 1 main room. A sleeping corner with a curtain she had sewn from old flour sacks. A stone fireplace that drew well and threw heat clean across the whole space. A table, 2 chairs, 1 shelf of books read so many the spines had gone soft, a rifle above the door, a pistol on the table, always, and the journal. Sitting on the corner of the table like it owned the place. Black leather cover, worn through at the corners. She had filled 9 of these journals in 7 years. This one was almost full. She didn't read the old ones. She only wrote in them. There was a difference. Ash came out and settled by the fire. Cole stayed on the porch a little longer, nose in the wind, reading things Ruth couldn't. Then he too came inside and lay down near the door. His usual spot, Ruth filled the kettle, set it over the fire, waited. That was the other thing she had learned up here, how to wait. Not the restless, pacing kind of waiting she had known most of her life. This was different, patient, almost animal. The way a hawk waits on a fence post. Not anxious, just ready. She had not always been good at waiting. Back when she had been Deputy Marshal Ruth Calloway of Colorado Territory, waiting had felt like failing. She moved fast, made decisions fast, covered ground fast. People who worked with her said she thought like a cavalry officer and moved like one too. Except she had been 6 feet 2 inches of woman, in a job where most men barely cleared 5'10". They called her Big Ruth, half respect, half something else. She never corrected them. The name didn't bother her. What bothered her was the pause. The half-second pause that happened every time she walked into a room. Every new deputy, every witness, every suspect, every man who had to take orders from her. That pause, that recalculation. She had learned to walk through that pause like it wasn't there. Learned to speak before they finished their thoughts. Learned to be so undeniably capable that the pause became irrelevant. And then irrelevance came for her in a different way entirely. But that was 7 years ago. The kettle whistled. Ruth poured her coffee, stood at the window, watched the tree line. Nothing moved. Good. Twice a year she went down the mountain. Not because she wanted to. Because coffee and ammunition had a way of running out whether you wanted them to or not. Same with lamp oil and flour and a certain kind of silence that settles when you've been alone too long and starts to sound less like peace and more like something you're hiding from. She wasn't hiding. She told herself that every time the town of Coldwater Creek sat at the base of the mountain, like a man who'd given up walking and decided to just stop there. Population maybe 230 on a census that hadn't been updated since the railroad came through and took half those people somewhere else. One main street, one saloon, one church, one general store that had been run by the same man for 30 years. Orvis, just Orvis. Nobody used his last name. Maybe he didn't have one anymore. Maybe it had just worn off over time, like the paint on his store sign. Ruth came into town before dawn on trading days. Before the street filled up. Before people had a chance to stand in doorways and watch her walk past and say things, just loud enough to make sure she heard. Orvis was always there when she arrived. Already had the lamps lit. Already had the coffee on. He was 65 years old and looked like something that had been left out in the weather since the war. Leather-faced, slow-moving, eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by most of it. He never looked at their Ruth the way other people did. He just looked at her. There was a difference. She would set her pack on the counter. He would open it and examine what she'd brought. Beaver pelts, marten, the occasional fox. Good quality work. He paid fair. She traded for coffee and ammunition, sometimes lamp oil, sometimes flour. Every time, without fail, he would wrap everything in brown paper, tie it with twine, and set it on the counter. And then, on top of the bundle, a chocolate bar, dark chocolate, the expensive kind. She never asked for it. He never mentioned it. She never thanked him for it. She just took it. And he never once acted like it was anything unusual. That was kindness, real kindness. Not the kind that announces itself and expects something back. Just the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need an audience. She trusted Orvis with exactly two things: her pelts and her privacy. He had never given her a reason to regret either one. The last trip down had been 6 weeks ago. October. Gas had already gone gold and started dropping. She had made good time on the trail, traded well. Ash and Cole had waited outside the store, as always, and the two women, who came out of the milliner's shop next door, had crossed to the other side of the street to avoid walking past them. Ruth had watched that happen, had felt nothing in particular about it. Ash was 110 pounds of wolf dog, with a pale silver coat that looked like moonlight on fresh snow. Cole was his opposite, dark as a starless night, built heavier, quieter. Where Ash read the world with his nose, Cole read it with his eyes. Ruth had found them as pups. A den in a rock fall, high on the western slope. Mother gone. 4 pups in the den when she found it. 3 already past saving. 2 tiny bodies pressed together, for warmth that wasn't coming anymore. She had carried them inside her coat for 3 days, fed them from her fingers. Kept them warm chest, watched them become what they were now. They were not pets. She had never used that word for them, not even in her own head. They were companions, something older than that, something that required no ceremony and no explanation. They asked for food, for purpose, for the daily proof that she was still there. She gave them all 3. Every day, and they gave her something harder to name. Something that mattered most on the nights when her past pressed in close, and the weight of it made the whole cabin feel smaller. When the journal couldn't hold enough words. When 7 years of silence felt less like freedom and more like punishment. On those nights, Cole would get up from the door and come sit next to her, not asking for anything, not offering comfort in any way she could name, just present, the way mountains are present, not warm exactly, not soft, but solid, unmovable. There, she had learned eventually that this was its own kind of kindness. November came down from the north with its teeth already out. Ruth had felt it in the air for 3 days before the first flakes fell. Something coiled and waiting. The clouds that built on the northern peaks didn't drift. They stacked, layer on layer, heavy and gray-white, and carrying something mean in them. She spent the day before preparing. Extra wood inside, close to the stove. Water containers filled. The last of her fresh meat brought in from the cold box out back. Windows checked for gaps. The bar on the door tested. Solid oak, iron brackets. It had held against a bear 2 winters ago. Held well. She wasn't thinking about bears. She wasn't thinking about anything specific. Just the feeling. That back-of-the-neck feeling she had learned not to ignore. The small weight behind her sternum. The way Ash had been sitting at the window all afternoon, watching the tree line. That evening, she set the journal on the table, opened it to a fresh page, wrote the date, the weather conditions, the state of her supplies. Then she stopped, held the pen over the paper, wrote one more line. She didn't mean the storm. She closed the journal. The snow started at dusk. By midnight, it had become something else entirely. Ruth lay in her sleeping corner behind the flour sack curtain, boots still on, pistol within reach. Not unusual. She had slept like this for 7 years. Some habits are not habits. They are just the shape your life takes after enough has happened to you. Ash was at the door, Cole near the fire. Both awake. The wind had gone from loud to vicious. It found every small gap in the log chinking and made a sound through them, thin and keening like something that wanted in. Ruth lay still and listened. There were sounds underneath the wind. Beneath the storm and the creaking of the roof and the hiss of snow against the window glass, Ash's growl started low deep in his chest. The kind of sound that didn't ask permission. Ruth was on her feet before it finished. She crossed to the table. Not rushing, not stumbling. Moving the way she had been trained to move, which was the way she had come to live. Deliberate, efficient, no wasted motion. She picked up the pistol. Ash was at the door now, not barking. Worse than barking. That steady, quiet growl that meant he had already decided and was just waiting on her. Cole had moved to flank the left side of the room, head low, eyes on the door. Ruth stood in the center of her cabin and waited. She heard them then, voices, low and urgent, fighting to be heard over the wind. More than one. Heavy footsteps on the porch, stumbling, the kind of footsteps that come from exhaustion rather than stealth. The sound of men who had been moving hard and long and were out of options. She almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The door shook. Once hard, a shoulder, by the sound of it. Then again. On the third hit, the bar cracked down the middle and the door swung open, and 3 men fell into her cabin, like the storm itself had gotten tired of holding them and just let go. Cold came with them. Snow came with them. Wind came with them. And 3 guns. She counted them immediately. 2 pistols, 1 shotgun. All 3 men were shaking. The shaking of people whose bodies had been cold for so long that warmth felt almost worse. Their clothes were wrong for this. City clothes. Good leather boots, but not mountain boots. Long coats that had started the night dry, and were now solid with ice along the bottom hem. They were young. Younger than she expected. The one in front, the one who had kicked the door, was maybe 40. Dark-haired. Sharp features. He tried to hold his pistol steady and he almost managed it behind him. A man a couple years older. Thick-set. Mean eyes, the kind of eyes that had made peace with violence a long time ago. He was holding the shotgun and he was pointing it at Ruth, without any of the uncertainty the first man had. And the third one. The one in the back, 20. Maybe 21. Trying to look like he wasn't terrified failing. The first man looked at Ruth. He looked at her height. He looked at the pistol in her hand. He looked at Ash and Cole, who were flanking her on either side, still and silent and about as comforting to look at as two loaded weapons. He said, "Don't move." His voice cracked slightly on the second word. Ruth did not move. She said, "Close the door." Flat voice. Oh, tremor, no urgency. The voice of someone giving an instruction they expect to be followed. "What? You're letting the heat out." A pause. The young one reached back and pulled the door shut. The sudden absence of wind was almost shocking. The silence inside the cabin felt thick. The first man was recalibrating. She could see it. He had come in expecting a certain kind of a situation, a woman alone, old enough to be manageable, small enough to be frightened. 2 out of 3 wasn't good enough. "Who are you?" he said. "I live here." She kept the pistol at her side, not raised, not holstered, just there. "Who are you?" The thick-set one said. "That's not your concern. 3 men with guns just kicked my door in." She looked at him directly. "I'd say that makes it fairly my concern." He took a step toward her. Ash moved, not a lunge, not a bark, just a step forward, fluid and low. And the sound that came from him was not the kind of sound you argued with. The thick-set man stopped. "Point those away from my dogs," Ruth said. "They're animals. They're family." She let a moment pass. 1 beat. 2. "You can try to shoot them. You might get one. You won't get both. And then your problems will change significantly." The first man raised one hand. Not surrendering, signaling. The thick-set one lowered his shotgun. Slow and unwilling. "We need shelter," the first man said. "Storm's too bad to keep moving. 1 night. That's all." Ruth looked at the 3 of them. She had been a law officer for 11 years. She knew how to read men. Not from what they said, but from what they couldn't help doing. The shifting of the eyes, the set of the jaw, the way a man holds himself when he's running from something versus when he's looking for something. These men were running. She could work with that. 1 night, she said. "You sleep in that corner. You don't touch anything. You don't threaten me or the dogs again." She paused. Agreed. Not a question. The first man looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Agreed. "And your weapons?" The thick-set one started to say something. The first man cut him off. "Do it." They holstered their pistols, leaned the shotgun against the wall. Ruth noted exactly where it landed. She did not set down her own pistol. She simply moved to the fireplace, added a log, and let the silence work for a moment. Then she said, "Silas Byrne." "Sit down before you fall down," the thick-set one stared at her. "How do you know my name?" She didn't. She had guessed from the shotgun, the way he held it. The arrogance that came from a man who had spent years being the most dangerous thing in a room. She said nothing. Let him wonder. That was another thing she had learned over the years. Silence could carry more information than any answer. The first man sat down. The young one sat. Silas Byrne sat last, still staring at her with those flat, hard eyes. Ruth went to the stove, stirred the pot she had been keeping warm. "Venison stew, 2 days old, still good. Eat," she said. "You look like you've been moving for days." They had been moving for 3 days. She learned this not from asking but from listening. The way they ate told her plenty. The way the young one drank the coffee she poured, like it was the first warm thing he'd had in longer than he could remember. The way the first man's hands shook slightly even after the stew and the heat. The first man was Cray Dolan. She didn't learn his name that first night. She learned it. Slowly, the way you learn most things that matter. A word here, a look there. The way Silas addressed him, and the way the young one avoided his eyes when they disagreed. Cray Dolan was the kind of man who had been forged by something hard and hadn't quite come out clean on the other side. Ex-military, she thought. The war. He had a quality stillness that men carry back from places that cost them something. Not broken, not whole, something between. He was watching her the same way she was watching him. She respected that. The young one was different. He was 21 years old, if that. Fen. Short for Fenwick, which was a name that explained why he went by Fen. He had a young man's face, the kind that hadn't fully finished deciding what it wanted to be. Good bones underneath, good eyes when he wasn't trying to hide them. He kept looking at things, the books on her shelf, The map of the territory she had pinned to the wall, pencil marks in the mountains where she'd mapped her trap lines, the rifle above the door, and the small items on the corner shelf, a carved wooden bird, rough work, something she had done herself in the second winter when her hands needed something to do, a smooth river stone from the creek below, a Bible she'd read twice and argued with both times, and the photograph, tucked behind the Bible. Easy to miss. She watched Fenn's eyes find it without meaning to, the way his gaze moved on quickly, casually, the way young people do when they're trying to appear like they're not looking at something. She did not react. She had forgotten. The photograph was even visible from that angle. The stew disappeared. The coffee disappeared. The fire worked. The wind outside was having what sounded like an argument with the mountain, and the mountain was winning on points if not on volume. Silas Burns said nothing for an hour. Then those aren't regular dogs. No. What are they? Wolf dog. High content? You raise them? Found them as pups. She looked at Cole. Their mother was gone. They would have died without help. Silas considered this like it was a tactical problem. And now they protect you. We protect each other. She looked back at the fire. That's how family works. Something shifted in Fenn's face when she said that. She filed it away. Craig Dolan spoke from his corner. You've been in situations like this before. Not a question. She didn't answer it. The way you moved when we came in, he said. The way you're sitting right now. You're not afraid of us. Should I be? 3 men with guns broke into your home, he said. Most women would be. I'm not most women. She met his eyes. You've noticed that by now. He almost smiled. It didn't reach anywhere, but it was there. What did you do? He asked. Before this, lived a different life. Doing what? Nothing that concerns you tonight, Silas said. Everything about you concerns us, if you're going to turn us in when this storm breaks. The temperature in the room did not change, but something did. Ruth looked at him steadily. I made an agreement. I keep agreements. Agreements get broken, not by me. Ash raised his head at something in her voice. Just slightly. Just enough. Silas looked at Ash. Decided not to push further. Smart man. When he wasn't being stupid, he was actually quite smart, Cray said quietly. We'll be gone at first light. First light in the storm is a long way off, Ruth said. Get some sleep, all of you. She banked the fire. Pulled the curtain across her sleeping corner. Lay down on her cot with her boots on and her pistol on the blanket beside Hertner. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see them settling. Silas against the far wall, arms crossed, not sleeping. Cray with his eyes closed but not sleeping either. And Fen had taken off his outer coat. She could see tucked inside the lining, the edge of something. A bag with markings she recognized, a bank logo. The fabric stained dark along the bottom seam. She understood then, with complete clarity, what they were, what they had done, why they were running. She pulled the curtain closed, lay in the dark, and listened to the storm. She had housed worse than 3 desperate men tonight. She had worked alongside worse. She had, if she was being honest with herself, once been something that others might have considered worse. Different times. Different choices. She closed her eyes. Ash's growl woke her, not the growl from before. This one was different, shorter, sharper. The kind that meant something new. Ruth was awake and moving before she was fully conscious of deciding to move. She parted the curtain with 2 fingers. Looked into the main room. Cray was awake. Already sitting up, hand on his pistol. Silas was awake, watching the window. Fen was on his feet. And Cole. Cole, who had been sleeping by the door. Cole was standing completely still, nose pointed at the window on the right side of the cabin. Not growling, not moving, just pointing, the way a compass points, steady and certain. Ruth came through the curtain, crossed the room without a word. She didn't light the lamp, stood at the window, looked through the glass. The storm was still running, still throwing snow sideways, still making the trees bend and shudder. But there was a gap. A brief 10-second gap in the wind, where the snow thinned and you could see, 30 yards out, maybe 35, a shape. Standing in the snow, not an animal, The posture was wrong for an animal. Too vertical. Too still. Animals in a storm move or shelter. They don't stand in the open and watch. A man, standing in the open, in the dark, in the storm, watching the cabin. The gap closed. The snow thickened. The shape disappeared back into white. Cray came up beside her. Look through the glass. You see something? Yes, animal. Ruth said nothing for a moment. She was thinking about the feeling she'd had 3 days ago. The back of her neck, the weight behind her sternum. The journal entry. Something is coming. No, she said. Cray looked at her profile in the dark, then back at the window. His jaw tightened. How long have you been up here? He said. 7 years. Anyone know where you are? She didn't answer that, because the answer until tonight had been no. And now. Now she was no longer certain. She stepped back from the window, crossed to the corner shelf. Without thinking, without meaning to, her hand went to the Bible, pushed it aside. The photograph was still there. She looked at it for a moment, herself. Younger. 20 years, maybe more. Standing in front of a building she recognized and would never describe. Next to a man she had not thought about in a long time. She put the Bible back in front of it, turned around, found Fenn, watching her from across the room, and something in his expression that she couldn't name yet. She would understand it in the morning. Ruth went to the fireplace, added a log. Not because it needed it. Because her hands needed something to do that wasn't picking up the pistol. Ash came and lay at her feet. Cole stayed at the window. She sat in her chair and waited. There was a thing she had learned about living on a mountain for 7 years. You learned the difference between peace and quiet, right now. The cabin was very quiet. It was not peaceful at all. She reached out and laid her hand on Ash's back. His breathing was slow and steady. She matched hers to it. An old trick, something she had learned in her 2nd year up here when the nights got too long and the memories got too loud. Breathe with the dog. Slow. Even let the rest wait. The rest always waited anyway. That was the particular cruelty of the past. It was patient. It had nowhere else to be. She could feel the compass around her neck. She always wore it, a habit she had never been able to break. Brass case, military weight. The one she had carried all through 11 years of badge wearing and evidence gathering, and choosing to see things she couldn't unsee. She had carried it when she ran. She had worn it every morning on this mountain. It didn't point her anywhere useful. Hadn't in 7 years, but she wore it anyway. Because some things you carry, not because they help you, but because they remind you of the person you were when you pick them up, and that person. That woman, that stubborn, impossible, 6'2" woman who had believed that truth mattered more than convenience. She was still in there, waiting. The storm raged outside, and somewhere in the darkened snow, a shape that was not an animal stood very still and watched her cabin and said nothing. Not yet. But Ruth Calloway had learned, a long time ago, that silence before speech was not nothing. It was a man deciding what he wanted to say, and deciding how much of her it would cost to hear it. She kept her hand on Ash, kept her eyes on the fire, and waited for morning. Fenn came awake at dawn the way young people do when they've been running scared, all at once. Eyes open, body rigid, the split second of not knowing where he was, followed by the worst second of remembering. Ruth watched him from across the room. She had not slept. He looked at the ceiling, then at the cabin walls, then at Ish and Cole, then at her. She said, "Coffee's on." He sat up slowly, looked at his hands, at the coat folded beside him, at the lining. She could see the exact moment he remembered. The paper. The one he had found tucked behind the Bible the night before. His face did something complicated. She watched it happen, watched him decide. He stood, crossed to the stove. She poured him a cup. He took it with both hands. Stood there 21 years old, looking into the steam. And then, very quietly, not looking at her, he said, "The Bible on your shelf." Ruth said nothing. There was something behind it. He paused. A piece of paper. She waited. He pulled it from his inside pocket, set it on the table between them, face down, did not flip it over. "I didn't tell the others," he said. She looked at the back of the paper, then at him. Why not? He wrapped both hands tighter around the cup. Looked at the fire, my mother, he said. Used to say that the worst thing a person can do isn't the bad thing they do. It's deciding another person deserves it, before they even open their mouth. A long pause. She'd be real unhappy with me right now, he said. For a lot of reasons. Ruth looked at him for a moment. Then she reached out and picked up the paper and slid it into her pocket without looking at it. Your coffee's getting cold, she said. Outside, the storm was finally losing its voice. The wind dropped, came back, dropped again. And from somewhere in the white, something moved. Cole was at the window before Ruth heard it. That absolute stillness, nose to the glass. Ruth crossed the room, looked out. The shape was back, different position, closer. And this time, in the thin gray light of a Colorado winter dawn, she could see enough to understand that the shape was not wandering, not lost. It was positioned, the way a man positions himself when he's preparing to make a move, and he wants to know exactly what he's moving toward. Ruth's hand found the pistol. Ash was at her leg. Behind her, she heard Cray Dolan wake up. Heard him say nothing. Heard him cross the room. He looked over her shoulder through the glass. And very quietly, he said, You're not going to like the next few hours, are you? It was not a question. Ruth kept her eyes on the shape in the snow. I haven't liked the last 7 years, she said. One more bad morning won't kill me. She said it like she believed it, because she had to. Because standing in her own cabin, in her own mountains, in the life she had built from nothing after everything had been taken from her, Ruth Calloway was not going to let fear be the thing that decided what happened next. Not today. Not again. She straightened up, stood her full 6 feet and 2 inches, and waited for whatever was coming to come. That morning passed without incident, barely. The second morning came like an apology. Gray light. Thin. The kind that doesn't commit to anything. It crept through the window glass and landed on the table. And the cold stove and the 3 men who had spent the not quite sleeping in Ruth Calloway's cabin. The storm had dropped to a mutter. Still there. Still mean. But no longer screaming, which meant the snow wasn't falling hard enough to hide a man standing 30 yards out anymore. Which meant whatever was out there could see them now too. Ruth had been awake the whole night. She didn't advertise this. She sat in her chair with her coffee and her pistol and her dogs. And she looked like a woman who had simply risen early. Because she had risen about 24 hours ago, simply not stopped. Cray Dolan was awake. He'd been awake for the last 2 hours, she figured, pretending not to be. Men who've been soldiers sleep the same way Ruth slept. 1 foot in, 1 foot out, never fully under. Silas Burns slept like a man with a clear conscience, which told her something about the particular architecture of his conscience. Fenn was awake, had been for a while. Lying, still and looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone having an argument with themselves that they were losing. Ruth stood, set her cup down, crossed to the stove, cornmeal. Water, salt, the most basic thing in the world. She made it without thinking. Her hands knew this. Her hands had made this same breakfast 700 mornings in a row. The smell of it woke Silas. He sat up, looked at her, looked at the stove, looked at the window. Storm's dropping, he said. For now, we can move soon. You can try. She stirred the pot. Snow's up to your knee out there. Trail down to the valley will be chest deep in the cuts. You'll be moving 1 mile an hour if you're lucky. He didn't like that. She didn't care what he liked. Cray sat up from his corner, rubbed his face, looked at the room the way soldiers look at rooms. Fast, systematic, cataloging what had changed while he wasn't watching. His eyes stopped at the table. The wanted poster was gone. He knew where it had been because Fenn had told him, quietly in the dark 2 hours ago. She had watched that conversation happen from behind mostly closed eyes. Fenn's mouth moving. Cray listening. The long pause after. Cray had not moved after that, had not done anything. Had just lain there with the information and apparently decided to wait for morning before he decided what to do with it. Smart or careful? Both, probably. Now he looked at the table, then at Ruth's back. Then he stood and came to get coffee, and he said, perfectly casual, "Sleep well." "Fine," Ruth said. Same tone, same nothing in it. A beat. "Cornmeal smells good," he said. "It's cornmeal. It smells like cornmeal. I've been eating jerky for 3 days. Right now it smells incredible." She almost smiled. She didn't. She handed him a bowl. They ate. All 4 of them at the table, which was not a large table. Fen sat across from Silas and didn't look at him. Silas ate fast, the way men eat, who grew up not knowing if someone was going to take the plate. Cray ate slow and watched the window. The window was showing them a world gone white and still, and deeply, profoundly quiet. Too quiet. Ruth set down her spoon. Ash had been sitting by the boudoir all morning, not lying down, not pacing, just sitting, ears forward. Cole was at the window. Both of them pointed at the same spot in the tree line. Ruth pushed back her chair. "I need to check the storage shed," she said. "We'll go with you," Cray said immediately. "I don't need help checking a shed. Humor me." She looked at him. He looked back fine. She pulled on her heavy coat. The wool one, lined with deer hide, built for genuine mountain cold, rather than the kind of cold that just inconveniences you. She wrapped her scarf, pulled on her gloves. Silas stood up. "I'll go," he said. Ruth and Cray both looked at him. "I'm saying I'll go with her," he shrugged. The casual shrug of a man who knows exactly how casual he's appearing. "Stretch my legs." Something moved behind Cray's eyes. "Some calculation." "Fine," he said. "Fen and I will stay here." Fen looked up sharply. Not happy about that. Tough Ruth opened the door. The cold was immediate and total. Not the polite cold of a winter morning in a town with buildings and fires in every window. This was mountain cold, the kind with opinions. It took the breath you had just breathed inside and swapped it. Swapped it for something that felt like swallowing metal. Silas made a sound behind her. She didn't. The snow was exactly as deep as she had said it would be, knee-height in the open, deeper in the drifts. She moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times, reading the surface, finding the firmer ground beneath where the earth was solid and the snow was only snow rather than snow, hiding a drop. Silas followed her tracks exactly. Smart, at least. The storage shed was 25 yards from the cabin. It looked like everything else up here. Weathered gray wood. Simple construction. Nothing about it announced itself. The door was open. Not wide open. Just ajar. The latch hanging. Ruth stopped, put her arm out, stopped Silas behind her. She stood in the snow and looked at the door for a long moment, then at the ground around it. The snow in front of the shed had been disturbed. Not by wind. Wind makes patterns. This was something else. Compressed in the way that footsteps compress snow, then drifted over just enough to blur the edges. Someone who knew about snow and was trying to be careful. Not careful enough. She moved forward, pushed the door open with her shoulder. The shed was organized the way everything in Ruth's life was organized. A place for every tool, every trap, every piece of equipment. She knew this space the way she knew her own hands. Every detail memorized, not because she was tidy, but because she needed to be able to read it like a book. And something had been reading it before her. The traps on the left wall. One had been moved, returned, but not quite to the right position. The trap lines hung left when they weren't in use. This one hung straight, the supply shelf. The flour tin had been shifted, just slightly. The ring of clear wood beneath it was off-center. And in the back corner, the floor. Ruth crossed the shed and crouched down. Boot prints. Faint, half-filled with the fine snow that had drifted in through the gap around the door. But there. And large, larger than her boot. Larger than any of the 3 men in the cabin. The tread of a boot with iron heel caps. Military style. Territory style. She was still crouched over the prints when Silas came in behind her. He looked at the prints. Looked at her. Something changed in his face. Not fear. Not exactly. Something more complicated than fear. The expression of a man who has known something bad was coming and has just watched it arrive. "That's not one of ours," he said. "No, How many sets? She studied the floor carefully. One entry point, one exit. But the prints overlapped in a way that suggested the person had stood here for a while and shifted their weight. Waiting. Watching through a gap in the shed wall. One person, she said. Standing here long enough to get cold, could be a drifter in this storm. With military boots, she stood. No, she looked at the shelf near the back wall. At the loose board she had installed herself in the second year, which looked like settling wood, and was not. She could see from the angle of the light through the door gap that the board was undisturbed, good, but only just. Whoever had been in here had been one careful, patient step away from finding something that would have changed everything. She turned round and found Silas Byrne looking at her with an expression that was not the flat, hard look he had worn since last night. This was something else, something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. They walked back in silence. The wind had picked up slightly, enough to sting. Silas stayed close behind her, following her tracks, and he didn't say a word the whole way back, which was how she knew he had something to say. Men who have nothing to say fill silence. Men who have something real to say go quiet and carry it. She pushed open the cabin door, stepped inside. Cray was on his feet before she finished crossing the threshold. He looked at her face. Then at Silas behind her. What? He said. Not oxygen. She pulled off her gloves, set them by the fire, turned to face the room. Someone was in the storage shed, she said, before the storm dropped. They were in there long enough to look around carefully. How long ago? 4 hours, maybe 5. And they're still out there, almost certainly. Fen was standing by the window now, looking out at the tree line. His hands were at his sides, and his fingers were doing that thing young men's fingers do when they're working hard not to show they're scared, pressing against his thighs. 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. Cray turned to Silas, slow turn. The kind that has been building for a while. Silas, he said. Silas was looking at the floor. Silas looked up, met Cray's eyes, held them for 3 seconds, and then something in him just stopped. 3 weeks ago, he said. Pueblo, nobody moved. A man came to see me at the Crooked Horse. Said he'd heard I was looking for work. Said he had a job. Paid well. Easy. Cray said nothing. He wanted a robbery. Specific bank. Coldwater Creek. Silas's jaw worked. Said after the job, when we ran, we should run north. Into the mountains. Toward the high trails above Coldwater Creek. The fire crackled. Ash made a sound in the back of his throat. He paid $300 up front, Silas said. Promised $700 on completion. Cray said, very quietly. Silas, I know. You brought us here on purpose. I brought us somewhere to run. That part was real. The route was his. Silas looked at Ruth then. First time he'd looked at her directly since they came back from the shed. He didn't tell me why he wanted someone to come up here. He didn't say anything about a woman on the mountain, but you didn't ask, Cray said. Science. You didn't ask. Silas looked back at the floor. Ruth stood in the center of the room and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature outside, not surprise. She had learned a long time ago that surprise was a luxury she mostly couldn't afford, but confirmation, the specific thing you had suspected finally becoming a thing you knew, she said. What was his name? Silas looked at her. The man in Pueblo, she said. His name, a pause. He gave a name, Silas said. Might not be real. Give it to me anyway, Vance, Silas said. Colonel Aldous Vance. The name landed in the room, like something dropped from a height. Ruth stood completely still, and she thought 7 years. 7 years of careful, 7 years of quiet. Twice a year to town and back, same route, same hours. Same careful, ordinary life, built from scratch in a place where no one had any reason to look. 7 years. And here was the name she had not said out loud in all of that time, spoken by and she had never met, in her own cabin, in the middle of a blizzard. Fen said, "Who is Vance?" Nobody answered him. Not yet. Cray was looking at Ruth with an expression she couldn't entirely read, which didn't happen often, which told her it was a complicated expression. He said, "You know that name?" "Yes. Who is he?" She crossed to the table, sat down, folded her hands in front of her, and she said, "Sit down, all of you." She told it without decoration. That was the only way she could tell it. She had learned that about the truth a long time ago. You can dress it up, or you can say it plain. Dressing it up makes it easier to say but harder to believe. Saying it plain hurts more but lands cleaner. She said it plain. "I was a deputy marshal," she said. 11 years. Colorado Territory. Before the territory got too organized to need the kind of work I did. She paused. In 1873, I was assigned to investigate disappearances in the Iron Fork Valley. Southeast of here, 25 families, homesteaders. A small settlement of Ute people who'd been there since before any of us arrived. Cray was very still. Fen had his hands around his coffee cup and was not moving. Silas was looking at the table. "It took me 4 months," Ruth said, "following paper and following people and following the things that didn't add up. And what I found," she stopped, breathed. The Ute settlement was gone. Not moved. Gone. 23 people, including children. The fire said nothing. "Underneath that land," she said, "there is a gold vein, one of the richest in the territory." I didn't know that when I started investigating. I knew it by the end, Cray said. Vance. Colonel Aldous Vance. Military career. Then appointed to territorial government. Oversight of land claims and resource rights. She looked at her hands. He authorized militia forces under unofficial orders. He arranged for the land to be cleared, and he arranged for the paperwork, documenting the Ute settlement, to disappear from the territorial record. Silence. I had documentation. 4 months of evidence. Signed statements from 3 witnesses who had survived and were willing to testify. I had enough. She paused. "I thought I had enough," Fen said quietly. "What happened?" "I was 3 days from sending my report to Denver." Ruth's voice did not change. It was the same flat, careful voice. Let it change, even slightly. It would change all the way, and that would not serve anyone. And right now. Vance moved first. A man was found dead in my office. One of the homesteaders from Iron Fork. A white man named Calhoun, who I had interviewed twice. Dead at my desk. Cray closed his eyes briefly. My report was gone. My witness statements were gone. Every piece of documentation I had spent 4 months gathering was gone. She looked up. And Vance told the territorial governor, and the town, and anyone who would listen, that I had killed Calhoun because he knew something about me. Something I needed to keep quiet, Fen said. Did anyone believe him? Ruth looked at him directly. What do you think? A long pause. You were a woman, Fen said slowly. The only woman marshal in the territory. Deputy marshal. You were. He stopped. Nobody believed you. I sent letters, she said. 2 senators, 3 territorial judges. I asked for an inquiry. I asked for time to present my evidence, which by then I had to reconstruct from memory. She paused. One judge wrote back, said the matter had been reviewed and found without merit. Without investigating. Without investigating. The fire crackled. Cray said, so you ran. I ran. The 2 words, flat as a board, with my journal. With the copy of my field notes I had kept at a different location. With the signed statements of the 3 witnesses, which I had been careful enough to keep separate from my office files. She paused, and I came here, and I stayed here. Because a woman with no institution behind her, no credibility with the men who run things, and a powerful enemy actively working against her, she stopped. You pick your fights when you can win them. And for 7 years you haven't been able to win it, Cray said. For 7 years I've been alive, she said. Which was the first requirement, a long silence. Fen said, the robbery. His voice had changed. Something had gone out of it, and something else had come in. The bank in Coldwater Creek, we planned that. It was our idea, was it? Ruth said. Not a question, Fen looked Silas. Silas still wasn't looking up. Found the job, Fen said slowly. Found the target. Planned the route. He brought it to Cray. He stopped. Silas, he said. The whole thing. The whole plan. Silas said nothing. You didn't plan a robbery, Ruth said. You were handed one. She looked at Silas. Vance needed you in Coldwater Creek at a specific time. Needed you running north afterward. You were a ship he chartered. You didn't know the cargo. Silas looked up then, and his face, for the first time since he had walked through her door, was not hard at all. It was the face of a man who has just understood the full shape of a mistake. Not the surface of it, the whole thing, all the way down. Cray said, "He used us to find you." "He's been watching for years," Ruth said, "monitoring the territory for anything unusual near the high mountain country above Coldwater Creek. 2 trips a year into town. Pelts, coffee, ammunition, same route every time. Same schedule. I thought I was being careful." She paused. "I was being predictable." Fenn said, "He knew where you were. He suspected. He needed confirmation. And he needed a reason to come up here with armed men that would look legitimate. If anyone asked questions afterward." She looked at all 3 of them. 3 bank robbers fleeing into the mountains. Authorities in pursuit. A marshal exercising his authority in difficult terrain, Cray said. "Except there are no other authorities up here. Except that," Ruth said. "One of them wrote to me," she added after a moment, answering the question she could see forming on Cray's face about the witnesses. 18 months after I left. The letter found its way to Orvis somehow. He held it for 3 weeks before I came down for my trading trip. Set it on the counter with my coffee and ammunition without a word. Didn't ask what it was. Didn't ask who sent it. She was in Mexico, alive. Said the other 2 had scattered but were living. That was 6 years ago. 6 years, I know, Ruth said. The lull in the storm ended at noon. Wind came back. Snow came with it, but lighter than before. More like a reminder than a threat. The sky above the peaks was doing something gray and complicated that Ruth had learned to read as a storm thinking about whether to quit or go another round. It would go another round. Not yet. But before dark. Silas sat against the far wall and said nothing. Fenn sat at the table and said very little, and looked like someone rearranging furniture in a room they had just realized was on fire. Cray moved through the cabin with a soldier's restlessness that wasn't quite pacing, because it was too purposeful. He stopped at the window, looked out, stopped at the door, listened, stopped at the map on the wall and studied it for a long time. Ruth watched him read it. He was good at maps. She could tell. His eyes moved the right way, he said. "How many men would Vance bring?" 4. Maybe 6. He never goes without backup, and he's not stupid. Where would he position them? Tree line, to the north, higher ground, 1 at the shed. 1 on the eastern approach. She paused. He'll want control of every exit before he makes contact. He'll make contact? He'll want to. Ruth set down her coffee. "Vance is a man who has been waiting 7 years to say something to my face. Men like that don't give up the speech. They wait for the right moment and then they make it." Cray almost smiled. "That's his weakness. It's one of them. What are the others?" He trusts his plan over his instincts. Once he sets a thing in motion, he doesn't adapt well. He believes people are more predictable than they are. She paused. "He's never had to deal with variables he didn't arrange himself. And we're variables he didn't arrange. You kicked in my door in the middle of a blizzard." She looked at him. "No, he didn't arrange that." Outside, Ash made a sound low and warning and immediate. Everyone in the cabin went still. Cole was already at the window. Ruth crossed the room, looked through the glass, a figure at the tree line. 60 yards, maybe 70. Standing in the open, not trying to be invisible, because invisible men don't carry tin-speaking horns. The voice came through the wood and glass, muffled but clear enough. Ruth Calloway. Fouled voice, carrying voice. The kind trained on parade grounds and courtrooms, and the open air of a territory where you sometimes needed to be heard over wind. Ruth Calloway. "I know you're in there. I know you're not alone." A pause. "Come out. Come out alone. The men with you walk away free." "You have my word on that." Ruth stood at the window and looked at the shape of Colonel Aldous Vance at 60 yards. 7 years. He looked older than she remembered. So did she. Probably. Silas said from his corner, "You could go." Nobody moved. I'm just saying it," he said. He said, "We walk free." His word, Fenn said, the word like something he was dropping from a height. His word. I know what his word is worth, Silas said, and his voice was tired. Not hard, just tired. I'm trying to think practically. Think practically somewhere else, Cray said. Silas went quiet. The voice came again. I'll give you 1 hour. After that, I stop asking politely. And then nothing. Just wind, and the gray afternoon light, and the shape of a man walking back into the tree line like he had all the time in the world, because he thought he did. Cray turned to the room, looked at all of them. We need to decide something, he said. Fenn said, we already decided. Did we? Yes. Simple as that. No drama in it. Just the flatness of a thing that wasn't going to move. We decided when we stayed up all night, instead of tying her to a tree and walking down the mountain. He looked at Ruth. At least I did. Something shifted in Ruth's chest. She kept it off her face, Cray said. Silas. Silas looked up. I need to know, Cray said, right now. Not what you're going to do. What you've already decided. A long pause. Silas looked at Ruth. Ruth looked back at him, steady. No threat in it. No pleading either. Just the straight, level look of someone asking a man who actually is underneath what he's been doing. Silas said, I didn't know he was going to kill anyone. I know, Ruth said. I would have. He stopped. Started again. I should have asked better questions. Yes, I'm asking now. He paused. What do you need? She told them then about the shed. Not the tools, not the traps. The floor, Cray said. Show me. She lifted the board, set it aside, reached into the space underneath, into the dry dark. She had packed with oilcloth and patience and the particular faith of a woman who believed that someday, if she stayed alive long enough, there would be a moment worth everything she had been saving. The tin box was cold. She set it on the table, opened it, a journal, not the one she wrote in now. An older one, the leather darkened with years, the spine cracked but holding, her handwriting from 1873, dates, names, facts. The careful documentation of a woman who had known she was building a case and had built it like a house meant to stand. 3 thick folded papers, each one a statement from a witness. Each one signed in ink that had gone brown with time but was still there, still legible. Names and dates and what they saw, and one more document. A copy. She had made it by hand, working through the night the week before Vance made his move. A copy of the Territorial Land Survey orders from 1872 and 1873, orders signed by Vance himself, authorizing militia activity in the Iron Fork Valley. His signature, his orders. Covering up the reason for the orders was one thing. The orders themselves were another. He had not known she had this. He had burned her office. He had not known about the copy. 7 years. She had kept this underneath her floor for 7 years, Cray said. This is enough. It's enough for a federal inquiry. Whether it's enough for a conviction depends on whether the 3 witnesses are still alive and still willing. But this, he touched the journal. Just the cover. This is real. It's real. Fenn was looking at the box. His face was doing something complicated. He said, you've been sitting on top of this for 7 years. Yes. Why didn't you send it? Why not mail it to Denver and let someone else deal with it? Ruth looked at him. Because Vance controls the mail between here and Denver, she said. Because I had no way to know if the people I sent it to were already in his pocket. Because an unsigned package from an unnamed sender gets burned, not read. She paused. And because, she stopped. Fenn waited, because I needed to be there, she said finally. When it happened, I needed to stand there in person and say what I saw, and who I am, and why it's true. Otherwise, he just calls it a forgery, and I'm a dead woman with a good story. Fenn nodded slowly, Cray said. Then that's what we give you. Ruth looked at him. A way to be there, he said. In person. Alive, outside. The wind was picking up again. That second round, right on schedule. The snow starting again, fine and sharp and sideways. And somewhere in the tree line, Colonel Aldous Vance was doing what men like him did when they thought they had already won. He was waiting. Tacit and certain, and completely unaware that the woman in the cabin had not spent 7 years hiding. She had spent 7 years getting ready. The hour passed, no one counted it exactly, but they all felt it pass, a quality of time moving through a space where something is about to happen. Thicker than usual, slower. Like the air before a lightning strike, Ruth rebuilt the fire. Not because the cabin needed it, because her hands needed something to do that wasn't running the plan over and over in her head, which she had already done enough times to have worn a groove in the floorboards of her thinking. Cray sat across from her. He said, "Can I ask you something?" "You'll ask regardless." The corner of his mouth moved. 7 years, he said. You built all this. The cabin, the trap lines. This whole life. He paused. And you knew the whole time that it might end like this. I knew it might. How do you build something when you know it might not last? Ruth looked at the fire. She thought about the first winter. How she had been cold in a way she hadn't expected. How she had learned to build a fire that lasted, because there was nobody else to keep it going. How she had started the journal, not because she thought anyone would read it, but because the silence needed something in it, or she would lose her mind. How she had found ash and coal in the spring of that first year, 2 small dying things in a pile of rocks, and had carried them home and kept them alive out of pure stubbornness. How the stubbornness had turned into something else over time, she said. You build it because you need somewhere to stand. Cray looked at her. Not because it's permanent, she said. Because you need ground under your feet while you figure out the next thing. And then the next thing takes longer than you thought, and the ground starts to feel less temporary. She paused. And then someone kicks your door in and you do nothing hissy. A long silence, Cray said. I'm sorry about the door. I'll fix it. I know you will. Fen made a sound from the window. Not a word. Just a breath with something in it. Both looked at him. He was still facing the glass. His shoulders had changed shape. Someone coming out of the tree line, he said. A different figure from before. Shorter. Moving carefully through the snow, carrying something. A white cloth on a stick. Ruth stood. Parley flag, Cray said. Or a distraction. She was already moving. Checking the pistol. Checking the rifle above the door. Running the positions in her head. Where the men would be. Where they would move. When the shooting started, because that was the other thing she knew about Colonel Aldous Vance. He was not a man who made offers he intended to keep. He was a man who used offers to learn what he needed to know, and then did what he had planned from the beginning. The parley flag was not a peace gesture. It was reconnaissance. She said, "Nobody opens this door." Wasn't planning to, Cray said. Silas had stood up. He was holding his pistol, not pointing it anywhere, just holding it. Something had changed in his posture since the conversation at the tin box. Something had settled into a new position. The figure stopped 20 yards from the cabin. A voice, young. A little shaky underneath the professional attempt at steadiness. "Ma Colonel Vance says his offer stands. Come out alone. The others leave free and clear." Ruth crossed to the window. She looked at the young man with his white cloth. Maybe 25, maybe younger. Good coat. Good boots. The posture of someone who had been told this was simple and was starting to have doubts. She said loudly, through the glass, "Tell the colonel his offer was refused the first time." "My answer hasn't changed." A pause. "Mom," he says. "I heard what he says." She kept her voice flat. Carrying. The same voice that had given orders in courtrooms and crime scenes for 11 years. "Go back and tell him I've heard him and I'm not interested, and if he wants to talk to me further he can come to the door himself." A longer pause. The young man looked at the cabin, looked back at the tree line, looked at the cabin again, turned around, walked back through the snow. Cray said, "That'll push him." "Good. You want him pushed. I want him making decisions from irritation instead of calculation." She stepped back from the window. "His plan is good when he's patient. Irritated men stop being patient." Fen said. "And then what?" Ruth looked at him. "Then we find out what kind of man he really is when things stop going his way," she said. She went back to the table, sat down. Ash came and lay across her feet, heavy, warm. She didn't say thank you to the dog. She didn't need to. Outside, the storm was building again. Another round, a long one. And somewhere between the snow and the trees and the failing afternoon light, Colonel Aldous Vance was standing in his good coat with his good men and his 7 years of patience and his absolute certainty that he had won. He hadn't won, he had found her. Those were two different things entirely. She had been here all along. Everything she had, everything she needed. Underneath her own floorboards, waiting for a reason to be worth it. And now here it was. 3 men she had not chosen. A storm nobody had ordered. An enemy she had been preparing for since before she planted the first log of this cabin in the frozen mountain ground. She pulled her journal toward her, the current one. She opened it to the last page she had written. That single line, "Something is coming." She picked up her pen, wrote underneath it, in her usual careful hand, "It's here." She closed the journal, set it aside, and began to explain to Cray Dolan exactly what they were going to do. Next dark came fast. Mountain winters don't negotiate about dark. It arrives when it decides, and it brings everything it has, and it doesn't apologize for any of it. The fire was the only light inside the cabin. Ruth had not lit the lamp. No reason to make their interior more visible than it needed to be, Cray said. "Walk me through it one more time," Ruth said. "Tomorrow, before light, all of it," Silas said in us. Ruth looked at him. "Where do we fit?" he said. Not aggressive, not defensive, just the flat practical question of a man who has accepted a situation and wants to know his role in it. She studied him for a moment. Then she said, "Can you shoot accurately in poor light?" "Better than most." "Good." She looked at Fenn. He looked back. Those young eyes, not frightened now, something else in them. Something that had settled into place over the course of the day, through the confession and the revelation and the tin box and the journal. Something that looked, if she was reading it right, like purpose. "I need you on the eastern approach," she said. "You're fast, you're quiet, and you're the only one of us who Vance's men haven't accounted for. Yet they know we're in here. They know 3 bank robbers and an old woman are in here." She paused. "They don't know which of the 3 bank robbers is worth worrying about," Fenn said. "That's not a compliment, is it?" "It's the most useful thing I can offer you tonight." He considered this. "Works for me," he said. Ruth stood, crossed to the window one last time. The tree line was dark. The snow was steady. And out there, somewhere, 4-6 men were keeping watch in the Colorado cold and thinking about tomorrow. Good. Let them watch. Let them keep their eyes on the cabin door and the window glass and the woman inside who had been in one place for 7 years and had clearly run out of places to go, because she hadn't run out of anything. She had been gathering. She turned away from the window. "Sleep," she said. "All of you. A few hours at least." "What about you?" Fenn asked. She crossed back to her chair, sat down, set the pistol on the table within easy reach. Ash came and lay at her feet. Cole took his position by the door. "I'll keep watch," she said. Cray said, "You've been awake since." "I know how long I've been awake." She looked at him. "Sleep, Cray." A pause. He looked at her face for a moment. The face of a woman who was 50 years old and had 11 years of law behind her and 7 years of mountain and one very long, terrible night still to get through. He nodded. "Lay down." Fenn lay down. Silas, last of all, lay down and closed his eyes. The fire burned. The snow fell, and Ruth Calloway sat in the chair she had made herself in the 2nd year on this mountain and watched the dark and breathed slow and the long, patient quiet of the small hours do what it always did, tell her the truth about what she was afraid of. She was not afraid of Vance. She was afraid of another 7 years. Of surviving tomorrow and going back to the careful small life and the journal and the twice-yearly trips to town and the question she never quite finished asking herself in the long Colorado winters. Whether this was all she was going to be. Ash shifted under her feet. Pressed his weight harder against her ankles, she breathed. The fire said something low and orange. And Ruth Calloway decided, in the small hours of a mountain night, with an enemy in her trees and 3 strangers asleep on her floor, and everything she had ever worked for folded into a tin box under the floorboards. She decided she was done being afraid of that particular thing. Done. Tomorrow she would either win or she wouldn't. Either way, the answer to the question she had never quite finished was the same. She was exactly who she had always been. The mountain had not changed that. Nothing could change that. She kept her eyes on the dark and waited for the sky to start slowly, painfully, inevitably to go gray. Gray came before the sun. That thin, uncertain gray of a Colorado winter morning that doesn't commit to being day until it absolutely has to. It crept under the door gap, slid across the floorboards, found the 4 faces in the cabin one by one. Ruth was already awake. She had been awake for hours, which was appointing simply the shape her nights took when something important was coming. The fire had burned to coals. She fed it 2 logs. Not for warmth, for light. The kind of light that lets you see what you're doing when you're checking a weapon you need to trust with your life in the next 2 hours. She checked the pistol. Checked it again. Ash watched her from his spot by the door. Cole was at the window, nose to the glass, reading the morning air through whatever small gaps existed between the frame and the log wall. Neither of them had relaxed since yesterday. Neither had she. The plan was simple. Simple was the only kind of plan that worked when you were outnumbered and outgunned and operating on a mountain in winter with 3 men you had known for 36 hours. Complex plans required trust built over time, shared language, shorthand, the kind of coordination that comes from doing something together. More than once, they didn't have any of that. So, simple, she would go out first, alone. Walk toward Vance, threck his attention, his focus, his need to make the speech he had been rehearsing for 7 years, while Cray and Silas moved through the tree line from the east. While Fenn took the northern approach on foot, using the terrain she had mapped out for him the night before, using her own hand-drawn survey of the mountain, while Ash Cole waited for her signal. Sybil terrifying, but simple. The night before, she had untied Silas herself. No ceremony. No speech. She had simply crossed to where he sat, cut the rope, and handed him back his pistol. He had looked at the gun. Then, at her, she said, "Don't make me regret it," he said. "I won't." That was the whole conversation. Cray woke at first light. No transition. Just eyes open, fully alert, the way soldiers wake when they've been sleeping somewhere. They shouldn't. He looked at Ruth across the cabin. She said nothing. He nodded. That was enough. Fenn woke next, sat up, ran both hands through his hair, looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then at Ruth, he said, "Is it time?" Almost. Silas was already awake. Had been for a while, she suspected. He was sitting against the far wall with his arms around his knees, looking at nothing in particular, doing the internal work that men do when they've made a decision they can't take back and they're making their peace with it. She understood that she had done it herself. More than once. She fed them. Last of the cornmeal. Last of the coffee. She made it strong and black, and nobody complained about anything. Which told her they all understood the morning for what it was. Fenn ate fast. Cray ate slow. Silas ate like a man who wasn't funny sure of this rule. Ruth didn't eat. Her stomach had made its position clear on that subject. She drank her coffee, stood at the window. The tree line was gray-white and still. Vance's men were out there. Had been all night. They would be cold, tired, irritated. Men who are cold and tired and irritated make different decisions than men who are comfortable and patient. That was something, not much. But something. Cray pushed his bowl aside. Looked at Ruth. "Before we do this," he said. She waited. "I need to know one thing. Ask it. The witnesses," he said. "The 3 people who signed those statements. Do you know if they're still alive?" She had been turning this over for 7 years, not daily, but regularly. The way you turn over a wound to see if it's healed or just scabbed. "One of them wrote to me," she said. 18 months after I left. She was in New Mexico. Alive. Said the other 2 had scattered but were living. That was 6 years ago. 6 years, I know. But the documentation you have. He paused. Even without living witnesses? Even without. She set down her cup, a signed copy of his own orders. A field journal written in real time with dates and corroborating facts that can be checked against public record. It's enough to open a federal investigation. She looked at him directly. Whether it's enough to convict him depends on who ends up in that courtroom, Cray said. Then we make sure the right people end up in that courtroom. Simple. She told them about the tin box one more time, not the contents. They knew the contents. She told them where it was going. She had written the letter already. Done it, last night, after Silas told them everything, in the small hours while the others finally slept. A single page, addressed to the federal courthouse in Denver. Clear and specific, her name. Her badge number from 11 years ago, which she had never officially surrendered because no one had officially asked for it back. The nature of the evidence enclosed. The request for a federal investigator. And her location, her real location, real name, real coordinates, no more Calloway. No more woman on the mountain who trades pelts and disappears. Ruth, just Ruth. Fen held the letter now, sealed with the wax she kept for preserving jars, which was the only wax she had, which was going to have to be good enough. When you get clear, she said. When this is done and you're clear, you take that to Coldwater Creek. You give it to Orvis. He'll know how to send it through the right channels. She looked at Fen. He's been waiting for something like this for years. He just didn't know what shape it would take. Fen looked at the letter, at the name. On the front, Federal Circuit Court. Denver, Colorado Territory. Attention, Chief Marshal's office said, you trust Orvis with this. With my life, she said, have been for 7 years. This is just the first time he'll know it. Fen tucked the letter inside his coat, pressed his hand flat against it for a moment. Said nothing, which was the right thing to say. Then she lifted the floorboard. Cray and Fen stood back. Silas was by the door watching the window. Giving her the privacy of not watching too closely, she reached in. The tin box was cold against her palms. Always cold. Even in summer, the space under the boards stayed cold. She had thought about that sometimes. Evidence of a crime against 30 people, kept in permanent cold, like the cold was the right temperature for what it contained. She opened it. Survey orders. She took them out one by one, wrapped them in the oilcloth from inside the box, tied it with a leather cord she had cut specifically for this purpose. Years ago, when she had first accepted that she would need to carry these things out of here rather than leave them behind. She looked at the package for a moment. 7 years under her floor. 7 years of her life. This mountain, this cabin, those 2 dogs, and those books she had read 12 times each, and those twice-yearly trips to town. All of it, in a way, was this package. All of it was built around this package. And now she was going to carry it out into the snow, and whatever happened next was going to happen. And that was just the nature of it. She handed the package to Cray. He took it, held it, said, I'll keep it safe. I know, she said. You're the only one I'd give it to. His face changed. Brief, complicated. Gone before she could read it fully. She didn't examine it. No time. She went to Ash and Cole, crouched down between them. Put one hand on each of them. Let them read her. Her smell. Her breathing. The quality of her stillness, which they knew as well as they knew anything. She said quietly, in the plain voice she used only with them, You know what's coming. Ash leaned his big head into her palm. Cole looked at the door. When I give the signal, she said, You go to the North Ridge. You'll smell him before you see him. The one who's been watching the cabin. She paused. Don't let him reach us. Hold him. That's all. Just hold him. She looked at Ash. You take the eastern approach. Cray's going that direction. He's not a threat. The men behind him are. Ash blinked slowly, understanding. Or something that worked like it. Something she had learned over 7 years of watching these 2 animals, learning their language the way you learn any language. Slowly and then all at once she stood, pulled on her coat, the pistol in her holster, the belt knife at her hip, the compass around her neck. cold against her breastbone. She looked around the cabin, 7 years of her life, the 2 chairs, the flour sack curtain, the books gone soft at the spine, the map on the wall with her handwriting marking every trail she had walked, every trap line, every survey point. She didn't say goodbye to any of it. That would be the wrong thing. If she came back, she came back. If she didn't, she didn't. Either way, the cabin didn't need her sentimentality. It was a structure of logs and stone and iron brackets. It had done its job. She went to the door, opened it. The cold hit her like it always did, Kalimped. Immediate, no negotiation. The snow had stopped in the night. What was left was the world it had made, white on every surface. The trees bent under it. The clearing in front of the cabin was an unmarked field of white except for the tracks they had made yesterday, already half-filled with drift. The morning light was thin and angled, that low-horizon winter light that makes every shadow long and turns the snow silver at the edges. Beautiful. The mountain had always been beautiful, even now. She stepped off the porch. Her boots went into the snow and found the ground below it. She moved forward, slow and deliberate, hands visible at her sides. No sudden movements, because she knew he was watching. She knew exactly where he was watching from 60 yards to the north ridge, slightly elevated, with a clear sight line to the cabin door. The position she would have chosen herself in his situation. She walked toward it. She did not hurry. She did not run. She walked the way she had walked into courtrooms and crime scenes, and the offices of men who thought her height was a problem she should apologize for, like she had somewhere to be, like she expected to arrive. 20 yards. She heard him before she saw him, the sound of boots in snow, deliberate. Coming to meet her because of course he would. Because Vance had been waiting for this moment for 7 years, and he was not the kind of man to let it happen at a distance. He stepped out from the tree line at 40 yards. He was dressed well for the mountain. He had planned better than his men. Good heavy coat, good boots, a hat pulled down against the wind. He was 58 years old, and he had gone gray since she last saw him, properly gray, and it made him look more substantial somehow, rather than less. He held a rifle at his side pointed, at the ground. She stopped. 20 yards between them. She could see his face clearly now. That face she had spent 7 years not thinking about, meant she had thought about it constantly. In the way you think about things, you are active choosing not to think about. He looked at her. She stood at her full height in the morning light and looked back. The half-second pause, that recalculation, even now, even Vance, who had known exactly what she was for 20 years, still that pause. She had never gotten used to it. She never would. He said, Ruth Calloway, like a conclusion. Like the period at the end of a sentence he had been writing for 7 years, she said, Colonel, you look well, he said. Mountain life agrees with you. More than it should, she said, given you've been trying to end it for 7 years. He tilted his head slightly, a gesture she remembered. It meant he was deciding whether to be honest or diplomatic. He had always been better at the first one, which was ironic for a man who had built his entire career on the second. I looked for you, he said, extensively. I know, you're better at disappearing than I expected. You always underestimated me, she said. Even when I was working for you. Even when I was the best investigator in your office. His jaw tightened. Just slightly. You were good, he said. You were very good. That's why this is a shame. Shame, she said. You had a career. I would have protected you, promoted you, if you had come to me first with what you found in Iron Fork. We could have. 23 people, she said. He stopped. Including children, she said. We could have what, Aldous? Talked about it quietly? Found a way to make it go way that worked for everyone important? She paused. Those people were important. They were an obstacle, he said. And the diplomat was gone now, just the man underneath. To development, to progress, to the kind of growth this territory needed to become a state. You killed them, the militia. On your orders, he looked at her steadily. On your written, signed orders, she said. which I have. Something changed in his face, then small, almost invisible. But she had been watching his face for a long time. She saw it the first crack, in the certainty. The absolute, bedrock certainty that he had won 7 years ago, and winning was simply a matter of collecting. "You burned my office," he said. "Everything in it." "My office," she said. "Not my home. Not the copy I made the week before you moved against me." She paused. "One beat. Let it land. I had your orders in my hands the night I left Aldous. I've had them for 7 years, waiting." The silence between them was the loudest thing on the mountain. Vance stood in the snow and looked at her, and she watched him redo the calculation. The one he had thought was settled. The one he had built 7 years of certainty on top of. He was fast. She'd give him that. She watched him reach the new conclusion in under 3 seconds, and she watched him raise the rifle. She dropped. Left. Hard. Into the snow. His shot cracked through the air where her chest had been a breath before. And then Ash hit him from the left, moving at full speed through open snow, low and fast and absolutely silent until the moment of impact. Vance went down hard, the rifle flying, his arm going up to protect his face. A sound coming out of him that was not dignity or authority or the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed, just a man, on his back, in the snow with a wolf dog pinning him. From the east, a shot. Silas. Then 2 more in quick succession. Return fire, men breaking cover. From the north, Cole. A shout from that direction. Ruth was on her feet, moving, not toward Vance, away from him. Because Ash had Vance and Vance's rifle was in the snow 6 feet from him, and she needed to. A man came out of the trees to her right, fast. Already aimed. She didn't stop moving, changed direction. The shot hit snow 2 feet to her left. She had her pistol up. 2 shots. 1 hit. He went down. She kept moving. The eastern tree line was noise and movement. Cray's voice, clear and hard, giving orders no louder than necessary, absolute authority in the volume he chose to use. Silas Byrne. It turned out, shot better under pressure than he did in calm conditions. Ruth did not have time to find this surprising. Fenn was on the north ridge. She could see him against the tree line, pressed flat behind a boulder, rifle up. Cole was somewhere in the snow between Fenn and a second man, who was moving too slow and calling out in a voice that had psyched be anything. She ran. The snow was her enemy, and she knew it. Every step was a negotiation. Every stride cost twice what it would on clear ground. She had spent 7 years running these slopes in every condition, and she ran them now like she ran them in her sleep, which she had. Literally, she had dreamed this terrain more times than she could count. She reached the north ridge at a dead run and came around the boulder to find Fenn face to face with a man 38 inches taller, and thapen, and 20 years younger. Fenn was holding his ground, just barely. Ruth put herself between them. The man looked at her height, that pause. She said, "Down." He looked at the pistol in her hand. He went down. Cole moved in from the flank and sat down next to the man. With a calm and terrible patience that communicated, without any words at all, the full extent of his feelings on the matter. Fenn breathed. "Thanks," he said. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Where's the other one?" "East. Silas. Got him. Silas." "I know." Fenn almost looked surprised. "He's a complicated man. Most people are." She said. She turned back toward the clearing. Vance was on his feet. Ash had released him when Ruth signaled. 2 sharp whistles. Ash stepped back, maintained his position, watching. Vance was standing in the snow with his coat torn at the shoulder and blood on his hand from where the fall had split his palm on the frozen ground. He was looking at Ruth across 20 yards of white. Craig was to her left, 10 yards, rifle up. Silas was somewhere behind her. Fenn came up on her right. 4 people in a semicircle in the snow, 2 wolf dogs completing the geometry. Vance looked at all of them. He was breathing hard. Not from exertion. From the recalculation. The continuous, ongoing recalculation of a man who had planned for many variables and had not planned for this particular combination of them. He said, "You had help." "I had 3 bank robbers who kicked my door in," Ruth said. They turned out to be more useful than I expected. This changes nothing. Tell me why. You're still wanted. The warrant is still active. The moment you come down from this mountain, you're under arrest. For a murder that didn't happen, she said. Yes, I know. She walked toward him. Slow, steady, each step deliberate. Except I'm going to come down from this mountain with 7 years of evidence, and a federal letter of inquiry, and your own signed orders in a federal courthouse, and the warrant is going to look significantly different by the time anyone acts on it. He watched her approach. You can't prove the orders are genuine, can't I? A document you claim to have kept for 7 years, written by a wanted criminal. Hidden on a mountain, compared to your word, she said. The word of a man who is currently standing in the snow after attempting to murder a woman with a rifle in front of 4 witnesses. She stopped, 8 feet away. You always were better at choosing moments than outcomes. Aldous. His jaw worked. She could see him running it. All the options, all the possibilities. Who had faced her down 7 years ago with complete certainty, and had been finding reasons for certainty ever since she waited. Let him run it. Let him reach the end of it. And then Vance did something she had not expected. He laughed. Short, not bitter. Something almost genuine in it, you know, he said. I always told myself the day I found you would be a relief, and I find I'm mostly just tired, he said. 7 years of this. For what? He looked at the mountain, at the snow, at the clear, cold, indifferent beauty of the Colorado high country on a winter morning. For a gold vein that paid out in the first 2 years and has been running thin ever since. Ruth looked at him. 23 people, she said again. Quiet. Just for him, he met her eyes. And for the first time in 20 years of knowing this man, something in his face that was not calculation, not authority, not the performance of a man who had made peace with what he had done. Something older and heavier than any of that. She didn't name it. She didn't need to. She stepped back, looked at Cray. Cray said, Silas. Silas came forward with the rope. Practical man. He had thought to bring rope. He tied Vance's hands behind his back with the competent, unapologetic efficiency of someone who had done this before for other reasons and found the activity transferred well. Vance did not resist. Fenn stood at the edge of the clearing and watched. And Ruth stood in the snow on her mountain on a January morning in 1880, with her hands at her sides, and the compass cold against her breastbone, and the thin winter sun finally committing to being day. Finally, 50 years old, standing in her own boots on her own ground. That was enough. More than enough. They brought Vance's men in from their positions, 3 of them. One with a wound to the shoulder, cleaned and bound with what Ruth had in her medical kit, which was extensive because 7 on a mountain teaches you that nobody else is coming if something goes wrong with your body. 4 men. Total. Vance plus 3. Cray looked at Ruth. We're 4 miles from the nearest trail down to the valley, he said, in knee-deep snow. With 4 prisoners, 3 days if the weather holds, she said. The snow's settling. Easier walking today than yesterday, and if it doesn't hold, then 4 days. He looked at the sky. The gray had warmed slightly, not warm. Nothing warm about a Colorado January. But less hostile. It'll hold, he said. Probably. That's not the most reassuring answer. No, she agreed. But it's the honest one. He almost smiled. She went back inside to get the tin box. She carried it herself. It wasn't heavy. The journal and the papers and the oilcloth wrapping and the leather cord, all of it together, weighed less than a good pair of boots. Less than the axe she used to split firewood. Less than a day's worth of provisions. For something that had been the center of her life for 7 years, it was remarkably light. She stood in the doorway of the cabin and looked at the room one more time. The 2 chairs, the flour sack curtain, the map on the wall, the shelf of books gone soft at the spine, the Bible. She crossed to the shelf, moved the Bible, took out the photograph, looked at it. Herself at 30-something, standing in front of a building she had spent 11 years walking into. Younger, harder looking, she thought now. The hardness of a person who has not yet learned that hardness is not the same as strength. She looked different now. Not better. Not worse. Just different. The way mountains look different depending on where you're standing and which direction the light is coming from. She put the photograph in her coat pocket. Left the Bible on the shelf. Whoever came to this place next could keep it. She hoped they needed it less than she had. They walked down 6 people, 4 prisoners, 2 wolf dogs. Ruth led. Because she knew the trail and nobody else did. And there was no point in being someone who knew things if you didn't use them when they mattered. Ash ranged ahead. Cole walked beside Vance, which was not a coincidence, and which Vance seemed to understand. He did not try anything. Smart at the end. The walking was hard. The snow was deep and the trail was buried, and Ruth navigated by memory and the way terrain feels under your feet when you've walked it enough times. The angle of the slope. The sound of the creek below, frozen but not silent. The gap in the trees, the third switchback, where you could see valley. If the air was clear, it was clear. Today, the valley spread out below them, brown and white and small at this distance. Coldwater Creek somewhere in it too far to see, but there. Fenn stopped at that gap, looked down at the valley. He said, "I've never seen anything like this." Ruth looked down at it too. She had stood at this spot maybe 100 times, maybe more. Twice a year coming down, twice a year going up, and sometimes in between, just to stand here and look and remind herself that the world was larger than her clearing. "Where are you from?" she said. "Indiana." He paused. "Flat. Very flat. The biggest hill near my house was a railroad grade." She looked at the valley. "Colorado takes some getting used to," she said. "How long did it take you?" "Still working on it," she said. He looked at her sideways. She kept her eyes on the valley. "Let's keep moving," she said. They reached Coldwater Creek as the afternoon light went gold, Colorado winter gold. The kind that only happens in that afternoon when the sun gets low and everything turns the color of good whiskey. Buildings. Snow. The faces of people standing in the street watching a procession arrived that nobody had expected. 6 people. 4 of them with their hands bound. 2 very large dogs, and 1 woman walking in front of all of it. Very tall, very straight. Not in a hurry. The main street of Coldwater Creek was not a long street. But Ruth Calloway walked it like it was the longest distance she had ever covered. Like every step was a choice, like she was choosing, step by step, to be exactly where she was, instead of somewhere smaller and safer and hidden. People came out of doorways. She didn't look at them. She looked at the general store at the end of the street. The sign above it, weathered through, paint flaking, the letters almost gone, but there. She pushed open the door. The bell above it jangled. The same rusty jangle it had always made, unchanged since the day she first walked in 7 years ago. Orvis looked up from behind the counter. He was 65 years old and looked like the mountain had made him from what it had left over, leather-faced, slow-moving. Eyes that had decided not to be surprised by things a long time ago. He looked at Ruth Ann. For the first time in 7 years of twice-yearly visits, those eyes registered something. Not surprise, something deeper. Something that looked like a man who has been carrying it for 7 years and has just watched the answer walk through his door. Ruth set the tin box on the counter. "I need you to send something to Denver," she said. Orvis looked at the box, then at her face. He said, "I figured this day would come, did you? Woman trades beaver pelts for coffee and ammunition, and never once asks about the weather or the news or anything that happens below this. Elevation," he paused. "Either she's hiding from the world or she's waiting for the right moment to walk back into it." "Both," Ruth said. It turned out to be both. He looked at the box for a moment. Then he reached under the counter and brought out a tray and a mailing envelope and the official seal of the Colorado Territory Postal Service. He set it all on the counter, said, "Tell me exactly who this goes to and exactly what you need it to say." Ruth placed her hand flat on the tin box, looked at Orvis, this man who had given her coffee and ammunition, and chocolate and silence for 7 years, who had never asked, who had simply been there. Patient and ordinary and decent, she said,
"Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet."
and just like that, like it was the most natural thing in the world, he pulled a chocolate bar from under the counter and set it on the tin box. Dark chocolate, the expensive kind. She looked at it, looked at him. He was already writing, already moving, so was she. They kept Vance and his men in the sheriff's office overnight. The sheriff of Coldwater Creek was 50 years old and had been hoping, fairly reasonably, to finish his career without anything more complicated than a drunk miner or a horse thief. He looked at the 4 prisoners and the 2 wolf dogs and the woman who was a head taller than him, and he said, very carefully, "Should I be sending for the federal marshal?" Ruth said. "The federal marshal is already on his way." "How do you know?" "Because I told Orvis to send 3 letters, and one of them went to the federal marshal's office in Denver." She paused. "He'll be over in 4 days, and these men, Colonel Aldous Vance," she said, "currently serving as Territorial Land Administrator, and 3 members of his personal militia operating without official sanction." She laid the copy of the survey orders on his desk, authorized under these orders, which are signed by Vance and dated 1873. Abbott looked at the papers at Vance in the corner of the room, hands still bound, saying nothing. At Ruth, said, "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to start from the beginning." Ruth said, "I know." She sat down. And she started from the beginning. Cray came to find her after. He was sitting on the steps of the general store in the gold evening light, which was rapidly becoming blue evening cold. And he had the look of a man who had been sitting there long enough to have thought through several things. She sat down beside him. The street was mostly empty. The horses at the rail, across the way, stood with their heads down. A dog somewhere barked once and stopped. Cray said, "What happens to us?" Not asking about himself specifically, asking about all of it. The shape of what came next, she said. "Silas talks to the federal marshal when he arrives. He has information about Vance's operations that goes beyond this mountain. He trades it for a reduced charge." She paused. "Not free, reduced. He'll do it. He'll do it," she agreed. "He's already decided." She thought about, and then, about his face at the gap in the trail where you could see the valley. About the letter tucked inside his coat, delivered now, handed to Orvis before they reached the sheriff's office. "Fenn has an honest face and an honest reason," she said. "A sick brother and a bad decision made in desperation. The federal marshal will hear that. It doesn't undo the robbery. But it's a different conversation than it would have been. You'll say something for him. I already wrote something for him." She paused. "And for you," Cray looked at her. "A statement," she said, "attesting to what you did on that mountain. What all of you did. The choices available to you and the choices you made." She kept her eyes on the street. "It's the truth." "I just wrote it down." A long silence. The evening light finished going gold and started going blue. Cray said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know, after everything." "You kicked in my door," she said. "And then you stayed. And then you chose." She paused. "That's not nothing. That's actually everything." He looked at his hands. Said, "I was a cavalry officer. 11 years, I know. You could tell, first night. The way you moved through the room, and after the war there was just..." He stopped. "Tried again. I couldn't find anything that fit right. Everything was the wrong size." He paused. "I made bad choices. You made a good one on that mountain. One is how you start." He looked at her, and she looked back. And there was something in that look that they both understood, and neither of them named. Because there was no need to name it, and naming it would have made it smaller than it actually was. He stood. She stood. He said, "Will you be all right?" "I've been all right for 7 years on a mountain by myself with 2 wolf dogs and a tin box under my floor," she said. "I think I can manage whatever's next." He almost laughed. "Fair point." He extended his hand. She took it. The handshake of 2 people who had been through something together that neither of them had planned, and both of them would carry. He turned and walked down the main street, Coldwater Creek. in the blue evening cold. She watched him go, did not look away until he turned the corner. Then she sat back down on the steps. Ash came and pressed against her leg. Cole lay down at her feet. She sat there in the cold with her dogs, and the compass around her neck, and the photograph in her pocket, and the tin box finally, in someone else's capable hands on its way to her. And she thought, what do you do with yourself when the thing you've been holding for 7 years is no longer yours to hold? She thought about that for a while. No answer came immediately. That was all right. She had time 3 months later. Spring, Colorado does spring the way it does everything else. Without apology, without gradual preparation. The snow retreats to the high peaks almost overnight. The brown ground remembers and it knows how to be green. The creeks run fast and cold and loud, with everything the winter stored up, and is now releasing all at once. Coldwater Creek had a spring feeling to it. On the day Ruth walked in from the North Road, not from the mountain. From the North Road, she had a horse now. A brown mare named nothing in particular, which was how she liked her animals named. She had bought the horse 3 weeks ago, in a town 2 valleys over, and ridden her carefully through the pass, when the snow dropped enough to make it possible. Behind the saddle, a pack, books, journal, the photograph, the compass, the essentials. She rode down the main street of Coldwater Creek in the spring morning, and the same people who had watched her walk through in January looked up again, and this time the looking was different, not fear. Not the calculation of strangers, something more like recognition. She tied the mare at the rail in front of the general store, pulled open the door. The bell jangled. Orvis looked up, she said. I need coffee and ammunition and lamp oil, he said. The usual then, the usual, she said. He started pulling items from the shelves. She stood at the counter and looked at the store. The same store it had always been. Dusty, practical. The goods of a life arranged on shelves for whoever needed them. Orvis set the items on the counter, began wrapping them in brown paper, then, on top. The chocolate bar, dark chocolate. She looked at it. Then at him. He was already writing in the ledger. Orvis. He looked up. I'm going to need to know about property for rent, she said, or sale, something small. In town or close to it. He looked at her for a long moment, said, my sister's place, on the east edge of town. She went to Kansas 2 years ago and hasn't come back, and the place is just sitting. He paused. Small house. Good roof. Good door. Room for 2 large dogs, Ruth said. How much? He named a number. She named a lower number. He thought about it for 2 seconds, said, deal. She paid him. He handed her a key. She looked at the key. Small iron thing. Old. The kind of key that has opened and closed the same door. Enough times that it moves smooth and easy and knows what it's for. She put it in her pocket, picked up the chocolate bar, broke off a piece, set the rest on the counter. Orvis looked at the chocolate, then at her. Don't say anything, she said. Wasn't going to, he said. She picked up her package, pushed open the door. The bell jangled behind her. The house on the east edge of town was small. 1 room, sleeping alcove, stone fireplace that drew well. A front porch with a view of the flat land to the east and the mountains to the west. She stood on the porch that first evening. The mountains, still there, still enormous, still indifferent in the mountain way that had always felt less like coldness and more like honesty. The mountains did not pretend to care about you. They simply existed, and you either dealt with that or you didn't. She had always felt restful. Ash sat beside her. Cole lay on the porch boards, nose in the air. Reading the spring evening, the federal trial of Colonel Aldous Vance had been scheduled for June. She would travel to Denver to testify. She had been told by the federal marshal's office, in a letter that arrived in Coldwater Creek, 3 weeks after she sent at the tin box, that the evidence was sufficient to proceed, that the surviving witnesses had been located, that all 3 were willing to testify. All 3, and all 3 were still there, still willing. She had read that letter 3 times. Not because she didn't believe it, because she needed to let it become real. the way some things need to be read more than once to finish arriving. She also had a letter from Fen. It had come through Orvis, who had apparently become, without anyone formally deciding this, the unofficial postal clerk for Ruth Calloway's correspondence. The letter was written in the careful, slightly cramped handwriting of someone who had not had much practice with letters. It said, "My brother is better. The doctor in Denver said another month of treatment and he should be close to right. I'm working at a freight company here. Honest work. Pays enough. I think about the mountain sometimes. I think you should know that it changed something. I don't have a better word for it than that. Something changed." She had written back. Something changed for me too, which was an understatement, but she was not naturally inclined to long letters. She folded both letters back into her journal, closed it, sat on the porch and watched the mountains go from gold to gray, to the deep blue of a spring night coming on. The compass around her neck, she took it off, held it in her palm, the brass case warm now from being against her skin all day. The weight of it, military weight, meant to last, meant to tell you where you were when you needed to know. She set it on the porch rail, looked at it for a moment. Not because it was broken, but because she knew where she was. For the first time in 7 years, she knew exactly where she was, and she didn't need an instrument to tell her. She left it there, went inside, built a fire, poured water for the dogs, sat down in the one chair she had, which she had brought from the cabin, because she had built it herself, and it fit her, and she saw no reason to leave it for someone else. She opened the journal, wrote the date, wrote the weather, clear, warming, first genuinely warm evening of the year, wrote the location, not the mountain, not the clearing, not the cabin hidden in the high country, above Coldwater Creek, just east edge of town. She looked at those 3 words for a moment. Then she closed the journals. Set it aside. The fire had burned low. The dogs were breathing. Outside, the Colorado spring was doing what it always did, getting on with things. Ash came and lay across her feet, coal settled by the door. Outside, the mountains stood where they had always stood. She sat with the quiet and let it be what it was. This was different from the cabin quiet. The cabin quiet had been the silence of hiding, of holding still, of waiting for something she didn't know the name of yet. This was just quiet, plain ordinary quiet, the kind you choose. The kind that means you're not afraid of what's in it. 50 years old. 6 feet and 2 inches of woman who had spent half her life being told she was too big, too much, too inconvenient to believe. She had outlasted every single person who said those things. She intended to keep outlasting. She was enough. Had always been enough. The mountain knew it. Had known it all along. The fire settled lower. The spring night came in through the gaps around the door, gentle and cool and carrying the smell of thaw and new ground and the creek running fast somewhere below town. Ruth Calloway, just Ruth, sat in her chair in her house with her feet on solid ground and her past finally behind her where it belonged. Not forgotten, not erased, just behind her. Where the past goes when you're ready to stop carrying it like a weapon and start carrying it like a scar, evidence of something survived, proof of the person you became. She closed her eyes and let the quiet be quiet, and let the night be night, and let tomorrow be whatever tomorrow was going to be, which was enough, which had always been enough. She just hadn't known it yet.